You feel this nervousness on the phone there?
Sir, I've been trying to make an urgent phone call up there.
Well, I don't think it's something I want to do on an overseas phone.
You gotta make some phone calls. Hang up the phone. Prank caller.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Packernet After Dark. This is the call-in show, the Packernet Podcast Network. If you'd like to call in, if you'd like to participate in the show, please feel free to do so. The phone number here is 608-501-0718. New callers go directly to the front of the line. It's been a few days. I made a critical mistake, apparently. I probably, 2-3 days ago, the last time we did a show, we were sitting at 7 calls, and I thought, I've done 7 before, but why don't we wait until we get at least one more? And we sat on 7 for like 3 days, and then today we have an 8th caller. I probably would have just done it anyways today with just 7, especially with no practice or anything. I can get an earlier start and jump on everything. But thanks to Uncle Rico, we got our 8th caller. So why don't we get started, I'm stalling, with Andy from Kansas.
Ryan, this is Andy, still stuck here in Kansas.
Howdy.
But things are going well now that training camp's upon us. Thank you for the PackersGames.com website with the camp.
I'm glad you're using that. I haven't checked the stats on that, but sometimes I build stuff and I check and nobody uses it, and I'm like, all right, because I mean, AI can do almost all the work. But even with this, there's a process of, I'm going to put the notes together either way, but saving them and then putting them on there and doing all that stuff. It's like, do I really care that much? So, and I'll just say this. Anytime I build something for you and you like that thing, let me know. Kind of like when I made the music player, which was kind of for me, but I was like, hey, I've been promising you guys this. I had several people reach out and say thank you. Even if it's just 2 people that use it, cool. Then it was worth it. That's fine. But it's when it's literally nobody cares, and it's like, all right, well, I'll just let that die then.
Updates. I would encourage other Packers fans to look at the ESPN write-up. They do a write-up for all 32 NFL training camps, and specifically the other NFC North teams. It kind of looks like we're coming out ahead if you look at the way that those are written, and those are written by different people who go to the camps. The Packers one is by Bob Domofsky. Yeah,
that's something I haven't done as good of a job keeping up on. I think I'll probably just rely on AI to scrape up a bunch of information for me, because I do. I mean, as things come up, obviously I've been going over it. But as far as doing like one big episode or one big write-up or something on the NFC North, I don't think I'd be necessarily prepared for that. I will say Minnesota and Detroit, it's been all bad. Minnesota started off okay, but now that the quarterback thing is a disaster, they're not happy. And then Detroit is they're back to having injury problems again. Chicago, I'm a little surprised and would be interested to see what you're seeing. Obviously the Cam Lewis thing is rough, and I just saw it looked like he was going to come back, and then it looks like there's going to be surgery, so he's going to be out like 4 to 6 months, which means maybe playoffs for them, assuming they go. So that's not good. But otherwise, I mean, they are extremely, and not that it really means anything, but they seem to be unbelievably optimistic that Caleb looks incredible. All the reports of Caleb look fantastic, aside from obviously the interceptions and stuff. I just saw something today. I didn't read it, but I just kind of saw it scrolling. Something to the effect of something clicked halfway through camp, which is, again, it doesn't mean anything definitively, but that is kind of the update that you would need. Bears fans would disagree that, no, we don't need that. He's already great. Okay, whatever. From my perspective, he needs to take a jump. And now they're claiming, or at least Caleb is claiming, that jump has happened. Okay, well, I guess we'll see. But definitely Detroit and Minnesota, it's just not been a very fun camp so far. I would say much more negative than positive.
Anyway, look at the Chicago Bears. It looks like injuries are really falling upon them.
Yeah.
Montez Sweat's injured. Braxton Jones is injured. Kobe Bryant is injured. Kobe Bryant's replacement just got injured. Luther Burden left practice
Burden
the other
got
day.
hurt
Didn't
too,
come back.
groin or something.
They do have some bright spots. Some of the backups are getting some playing time, so you might have some rookies that are talented but don't really know the game going for them. So we'll see how they finally face some major injuries. The Minnesota Vikings, I saw something the other day where they took note that J.J. McCarthy actually had a decent practice. That was the headline. So that's not good. They've also...
There are some McCarthy truthers the same way there have been like Justin Fields truthers and stuff. But I think for the most part, it's just been like, this guy's trash. Like, let's just get out. Let's be done with this. As I've said before, and I don't like to hype up other fan bases or whatever, I think the Vikings tend to have some of the more realistic fans. You could maybe argue they're negative fans, kind of like Packer fans, but they're just, and it's funny because it tends to be, I guess this is normal, it tends to be more like the content creator types and whatnot. I saw like what's his name, Thor or something, which is hilarious being from Minnesota. Whatever his name is, he was a huge JJ guy and all that. And of course now it's the team that has failed him and all that. It's the same nonsense every time. I wasn't wrong. It's just that the team failed him. I mean, it's not impossible that if you give him, he could pull off a Sam Darnold or something, maybe. Well, whatever. We don't need to go down that road. The bottom line is, I think most of the fan base is like, this guy sucks. So we need to do something else.
Had a few injuries going on, and they're trying to figure out their secondary. That's very clear the way that the writer who's trying to, I think, give the Viking fans something to be happy about. You can just kind of read between the lines, and it's not great.
No.
Jamal Adams, they signed him, and he's like really thankful because the Vikings would give him a chance, even though the Jets were done with him.
Right.
That is not positive at all.
Well, that's and I've tried to cut that off at the knees because whether it be Vikings fans who are like, oh, we got this, because they always package it as like he's a multi-time Pro Bowler. Yeah, dude, in like 2018 and 2019, those were his 2 years. All right, and that was it, and then he was done. Remember with the Jets, he was like the best safety in football. Then he goes to Seattle, and his career's basically over. And apparently now he's a linebacker. I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know when that happened. I guess last year was the first year that they did that for the Raiders or whatever. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is I've tried to cut that at the knees, not only for Vikings fans who are going to hype this up, but even, Packer fans and everybody else. Like, oh, how do you just get Jamal Adams? He's this freak guy, and you just get him for free. We could have got him. Fortunately, Packers don't need, I guess he's a linebacker, but we don't need a safety. Don't really need him at linebacker either. But I wanted to get out in front of that immediately so that there was none of that nonsense because this guy, beyond that, the injuries have been devastating. I think 2021 was his last full year. 2023, he played about, 2/3. Last year, he played about 2/3. In terms of even just snap counts, it looks like he's a rotational player. If we assume, 800-ish snaps as a full season, he played 518 in 2023, 448 in 2025. 40 snaps in 2024 and 15 in 2022. Actually, in 2024, he played for Detroit. Don't even remember that. That was the year he played 40 snaps for two different teams. That's how memorable this guy is. He played for Detroit, and nobody remembers that.
Detroit, the biggest news for them the last few days is that they gave their running back an extension. That I saw that several times over, that was kind of a big deal. They've had a few injury problems as well, or I should say their big time injured players are not coming back yet.
And they lost their center now. That was probably news after this call, but they just lost their center. And I went through that on the podcast, how, they had probably the best center in football. He retires. They go out and get a backup, guy that's been with Detroit for a while. You go from like all pro to like mediocre kind of a guy. Well, they end up moving on from him because he's 34. So then they go get somebody that's even worse, but he's younger. Now he's out. So we've lost 3 different centers in the last, 2 years or something? And we are down scraping the bottom of the barrel, and this is a team that's built on offensive line.
It's not perfect on our end, but, Trace Mack seem to straighten things out on family night, and we're looking at injured players and asking, can they come back sooner, because we know that they will. And it's just a lot of positive stuff. So take a look at some of our neighbors in the division and then ask yourself, hey, how things are going out. I think it's pretty good. All right, bye.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Again, I think Bears fans are pretty excited about their situation right now. But you're right, there are some injuries, and there's probably more than I'm giving credit to. I mean, I know there's some dings. Like I don't think Sweat is going to be a long-term deal, but I'd have to look. I don't know. Same with their wide receiver Burden. You know, it's I think that's the one that is a groin injury, and you say, well, that's probably a minor thing. It could be. Or it could linger, and it could even require surgery. You know, you don't really know the extent to which these things are going to be a problem. Those types of injuries in particular. You know, it's not like an ACL where it's you know what it is and it sucks. Or, you know, some other maybe more minor injury where you kind of know what it is and you know he'll be back soon. I would assume he'll be back pretty soon, but it also looked like Cam, is it Cam? I'm confusing two different people. There's safety that they just signed to Cam. It looked bad. He got carted off, and then he was able to come back, and it was like, oh shoot, it looks like he's going to be ready to go. I mean, again, not rooting for injury for anybody, but you know, in terms of we caught a break, it looks like that was going to come to an end, but. It looks like maybe they tried it to see if they can avoid surgery, and they decided that was just not going to work, and so they had to go ahead and pursue surgery. So now they're in a bit of a bind. Tell you what, let's just take a break, because we got a bunch more Andy coming up, and that took longer than I thought, so that's fantastic. Could have done this show a while ago, it appears. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. You know, it's so funny, because these headphones, I can hear through the microphone, but not as much, you know, through just the sound in the air. And the microphone only turns on when it hears a certain amount of noise. That's one of the things that makes this mic so much better than the one that I had before I got this. For a brief time, there was so much echo and all this noise around here. It was picking up everything. But the annoying thing about it is there is, and I'm guessing you can hear it, but I don't know. When I don't talk, it's silent. When I do talk, it's me plus a cricket noise. There's just like this in the background, and I'm like, it sounds like a cricket, but when I stop and try to listen, I don't hear anything. It's because of the stupid, I guess, kind of noise canceling of the headphones and the microphone. So it's such a weird, if you're hearing that, like, what is that ring in the background when he speaks? That would be a cricket. And sure enough, when I lift up the old headphones, I can hear the cricket just going full blast behind me. That dude is lonely. Anywho, Andy, please continue.
Ryan, it's Andy. I've heard a few After Dark callers. It might be a running joke. I'm not sure where it started, but the whole thing about making a big splash.
Yes.
Whether it be Goody in free agency or the draft, or players at training camp making a big splash. That's not an easy thing to do. Got to keep that in mind just for historical remembrance sake. Just recall that even King Kong Bundy could not big splash a midget at WrestleMania 3. Look that one up. He couldn't do it. So it's not an easy thing as many people believe.
I love you guys. That's funny. So the inside joke, just so, and I don't even honestly remember it entirely, but I there was a point in the off season where I kind of lost my mind a little bit. It's one of those things where you just keep hearing the same crap over and over and over again, and it had more to do with free agent signings. And the critique of the Packers is that they didn't do anything splashy, and all these teams are doing things that are splashy. And I got so freaking tired, I just kind of snapped from hearing splashy so many times. And I just kind of went off saying that nobody's allowed to say splashy on this podcast anymore. Obviously, I'm not going to hold to that, but that's more or less the inside joke on that one.
Ryan, I'm glad you played that clip from the Mina Kimes show where she, quote, felt trapped, that her guest was trying to insert Jordan Love as the nerdy football fan's new best friend, or however the way that you wanted to call it, and then to replace Justin Herbert. It was just annoying. I was annoyed with the guy.
Right, exactly.
I kind of felt bad for Mina, or I should say, I felt bad for her. She should embrace the fact that she thinks like a nerd.
Exactly. That was exactly my take. I was annoyed by him and his implications. And I'm not going to say I was necessarily annoyed by Mina. Mina's just kind of being nice and kind of went along with it and whatever. I'm much more confrontational and would have gone on the offensive, which is probably why she has a job and is very well liked and all that stuff, and I don't. But the bottom line is she should have absolutely gone on the attack, because cutting her out at the knees as though, and she's one of us. She is a numbers person. She is a nerd. That's why I like Mina Kimes. She definitely is intelligent. She's not one of those people that speaks and doesn't know what she's talking about. I don't always agree, but I always respect that when you listen to her speak, it's like she has done her homework. And I've said it's hard to do 32 teams. So hearing somebody that does 32 teams speak intelligibly about your team and saying things that are against the grain because the data says so, I like Mina for that reason. But I don't like that somebody cut her out at the knees by attacking her entire worldview in terms of how she views the NFL. Not saying it's entirely data driven, but you get what I'm saying. And she kind of just took it, oh, I know, I hate to say because of the data, whatever, but I just can't help. Dude, F that guy. Tell him he's an idiot and he's stupid and you're smarter than him because you are, and put him in his place and then give him the finger and then leave. I maybe she did it the right way, but I agree. I was not happy with him, and I wish she would have. And I think she did a good job. She brought it full circle, and in a way kind of buried him while kind of pretending to back up, conceding ground. She's like, oh, I know, I don't know what to do. It's just, it's so stupid. But I mean, if you look at this stat and 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 this stat, and she just rattled off all the stats like he's the best in all these stats. Like, gee, I guess I don't know.
I do listen to some of her podcasts. She does kind of an interesting one where she's had 5 different guests in 5 different episodes, and they come on and she gives them, she pairs teams one at a time and say who.
I hate that because everybody puts the Packers way too low and they put the Bears and everything way too high. I also get mad at Mina because she picks which one's next. And so the Packers don't even get an opportunity to be picked until you get past the top 10. At least, I haven't watched all of them. I don't really know, but that's usually how it goes. So once you get past the top 10, then maybe she'll give you the opportunity. And then usually the Bears end up going ahead of the Packers. And so, of course, the Lions do. I just get in. She's not the one doing the picking, but the people doing the picking annoy me. And then she annoys me for putting the Packers so low on that pecking list.
The better of the two, so it's the power rankings. Here are the first 2 teams, and she's started every single one with is it the Seahawks or the Rams, and then the guest picks between the 2, and then she carries over the one that he didn't pick, and then adds the next one. Right. And in all these things, the Packers are down 12 or 14 because some of these guys apparently they don't watch NFC football. It seems like there's tons of AFC. The AFC is this massive powerhouse conference, and I don't pay attention to AFC, so they could be right, but it seems a little bit unbalanced. Anyway, she looks like a cool kid, right? And she has guests on that I think also act like cool kids. Mm-hmm. That's what bothered me about that guy in that clip.
I think that's what annoys me a lot about sports media, and it's part of the reason I'm not as bothered by Mina Kimes, because she kind of outs herself as a nerd. So she's not playing a role. What I don't like are these dorky, nerdy idiots who are pretending they're the cool guys, and then they just act like nerdy dorks. But also we're so cool and I'm so popular and I look at me with my job and all this stuff. And it's like, I wish you were just a normal person and could just be cool and look like you're a little bit relatable and stop with this talking down to everybody all the time. What's his name ended up getting in trouble and potentially fired for, I forget who he was talking to, but he talked to one of the guys and talked down to him as you're not a guy who has played. And that was like a big, oh, how dare you? And, to some degree, yeah, it's a little smarmy, but also, there is some truth behind that. But they also, the hypocrisy is that that's how they talk down to everybody else. I mean, they believe that their opinions are somehow otherworldly when really it's just a random opinion. Very few of those guys actually have well thought out, thought through opinions. And it's Mina, and who's the other one that's on like NFL Network? She runs like a model. Cynthia Freeland. I love Cynthia Freeland. And also because she doesn't seem like she's acting or playing a freaking role. She almost has this attitude of kind of like, when everybody's doing their goofy stuff, she just kind of like, okay. I think it's just because I identify with people like her, because she's probably wired the way I am, where people act stupid and it's just kind of like, you're acting stupid. There's just a look on the face and a thing in the brain that it's just like, yeah, that's nice, dude. So those two I like. I know there's some people that really don't like Mina because she's very political. And so obviously that can create some controversy. Whatever. It's an entirely separate thing. I'm talking about what we're talking about here, which is football. And, for everybody I like, there's 10 people I cannot stand. But Mina is very, very good at her job. She's very smart. She's good with she's a stats person. And Cynthia Freeland might be my favorite just because not only does she do the stats stuff, but she just has this sort of like, dude, shut up attitude. She's very polite. She's very nice, but she just has like, I can see it. I can freaking see it. She looks at these people like you're all idiots. And I love it.
But she doesn't talk like a cool kid. She talks like a football nerd, and I just wish that she would embrace that and tell those guests, look, this is the way things are. This is how football analysis actually goes. She actually does do analysis. She's actually one of the only ones in the national media that has said, enough with this narrative that Jordan Love is a turnover machine, because that's not true at all.
Right.
Enough with the narrative that he's inconsistent, because he's not inconsistent.
Yeah, it was good she brought that up too, because even, the anti-stats people can pretend that any like second layer stat is just fake. But they can't deny the first level stats, yards, interceptions, these kinds of things. And so when she looks at it and says, I mean, obviously rate is kind of second level, but still it's an undeniable thing. She brings up like, oh, all these stupid people think he does this, but really, if you look at the data, he doesn't. And that just cut this guy right at the legs, because that is the number one thing people have about Jordan Love, is these inconsistencies, these really ugly things, this, that, or the other. And again, I didn't like the part where she kind of explained it away with this other fake narrative. And maybe it's not fake, but it's the same kind of analysis that this guy is doing that she generally doesn't. It's not data-based, it's hype-based, it's all this nonsense. And so she's kind of like offering some kind of an off-ramp, it feels like, which again is probably the right diplomatic thing to do, to come in and be like, well, the stats say you're stupid, but don't worry, it's not your fault. It's just because this very legitimate thing. So she's probably much more diplomatic than I would be, but I don't like that she offered that non-analytical off-ramp to everybody else. Don't play into that nonsense. Well, it's just that when he throws picks, they look so bad that everyone thinks he throws a ton. Yeah, I don't think that's true either. I think that's stupid, and I think it's just an excuse people make.
I just wish that she would just kind of put her foot down and say it.
I agree.
But if you have a bunch of cool kids on your show, you tend to get pulled towards the cool kids. At least some people do. Not us, though. Right? We stick with our
That's why we have no friends, and she's very popular.
Stats and our facts, and you listen to a lot of Yes. I know you do that. And
yeah,
I listen
do.
to a lot of Rush.
Oh, I love Rush.
So, hey, the nerds can still have a place in all this. All right, bye.
Yeah, big fan of Rush. Yes is more just I was indoctrinated with that. My dad was obsessed. He was a drummer, so he would always drum to Yes because it's very, very, the musicality or whatever that they have is really impressive. The drumming is ridiculous with Yes, but I'm not sure what that had to do with the last part, but I think I just think she has a slightly different personality type. I think she's very much like us, but in terms of what is that thing called? Agreeableness. This is what psychological. I can't keep those things straight. But there's a trait called agreeableness, and she has like the perfect combination because she is like a nerd with high agreeableness, and you and I would have a very low agreeableness or high disagreeableness, which apparently is like the number one difference between men and women, apparently. Women tend to be much more agreeable, men tend to be much less agreeable, which again allows her to be very good at her job, but also just like in two ways, because her job would require her to be knowledgeable, but probably more important than that is your ability to have interpersonal skills. That's how so many people that are terrible at this job actually have a job. So that's probably actually the most important part of her job. But she's able to and actually most of these guys have that, right? Even Cynthia Freeland, it looks like it pains her and she doesn't like it, but she's good at it. Benjamin Solak is another one, very nerdy, but I don't know that he necessarily has high agreeableness, but he's a very cordial person. He gets along and he can do all these kinds of things. They're not. You'll notice that, and this isn't very thought out on my part, but I'm just kind of thinking through this now. Most of the people that make it, that are in sort of the stat nerd area, have like the high agreeableness. The disagreeable ones, the ones that argue, are seemingly like the most low IQ people. So I don't know how that works. I would be like you. I would love to see a highly disagreeable stat nerd emerge in that space and just see what it looks like. And maybe they're out there. I don't know. They probably have a podcast somewhere or whatever. But in terms of like the big time ESPN, NFL Network, that kind of stuff, I don't think any of those guys have job. And I don't think it would be good for them because they have an entire industry of allowing different opinions, right? And we have to kind of pretend there's a billion different opinions and let them battle it out. You can't have somebody come in with a freaking trump card saying, well, you're wrong and here's how I can prove it, and so shut up. That doesn't help you. And so if you're going to have a stat nerd, they need to be able to come in and go, oh, I don't know, maybe. I mean, the stats are stupid, but I'm a stupid person. I think that's just how it has to work. I don't know. I haven't really thought it through all that much, but that would kind of make sense. And as I'm thinking right now, that again, there are obviously very highly disagreeable people like, pretty much all the blowhards. They're very argumentative is essentially what that means. A lot of these guys are very argumentative. And notice how they're almost all men. Just saying. Not a lot of female Stephen A. Smiths out there. So they're very good at that side of it. But I don't think that they can have the two things combined. I just don't think that formula works for them. But maybe I'm wrong, and you can call in and let me know if those guys exist, and I would love to see them. All right, let's take our final break. We got one more Andy from Kansas. This might just be the Andy from Kansas show. We'll see how this goes. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Last thing here, I saw this Packers troll on X, and of course it's bashing Jordan Love.
Sure.
And he took the last 10 NFL MVPs, who happen to all be quarterbacks.
Sure.
And have averaged their games played, completion percentage, total yards, total touchdowns, and total interceptions.
Totals, sure.
And he in his tweet he put this is the average of all the last 10 NFL MVP winners, and then he put some Jordan Love stat line like that. I don't know where he got those numbers from. He obviously did not take the 2025 stats just as they were.
I would assume averaged over that same time period, or maybe just over his career if he went back that far.
But I thought that's really the wrong way to make the comparison. You can't take MVP winning stat lines and compare them to non-NFL winning stat lines and expect that to make any sense. So what I did was I took the last 10 NFL MVP seasons, but the year previous to them winning, right? So like I took Stafford's 2024 stats because he won in 2025, and I think it was Josh Allen's 2023 stats because he won in 2024. So I took the average of what were the seasons like the year before all 10 winners won. And then
it's crazy how much you and I are similar. That's the kind of crazy, nerdy nonsense that I would do.
Compared to Jordan Love's last year, and the MVP previous years were something like 15.25 games, 65 something percent, 3,900 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And Jordan Love's was 14.5 games because he got injured like after halftime of that Bears game. 66 something percent, 3,300, almost 3,400 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. And so if you look at those two, I know it's kind of hard with being on the phone, but if Jordan Love would have played one.
Now I know how it feels doing the podcast and rattling off numbers to you guys.
One more game to kind of equal the average of the other NFL winners, he probably would have been still maybe 300 yards short and probably 2 or 3 interceptions or touchdowns short, but was better on the interception end and better on the completion end. So in the end, he's got a pre-MVP type line. All right, bye.
So this is a great example of what I mean when I say that statistics tell us something very specific. We like to pretend that we pulled a statistic that tells the whole story, right? So this guy put together something and he thought he made a very definitive point, but he didn't. What he did was he answered a very specific question, which is, what is the average stat line of an MVP winner over the last 10 years? So we could just argue that is the average stat line of an MVP winner. So the question then becomes like, what is the value in that stat? You could argue, and I would say that this isn't the correct way to do it, but you could argue that this would be a way of saying, if Jordan Love wants to win the MVP, this is kind of what you're expecting. But that isn't necessarily, in my opinion, the best way to do it. You could just look at the lowest, look at the bottom, right? Because this is sort of the barrier to entry. You could, probably not, but you could argue that and then just whatever. But it seems to me that I haven't seen the tweet, but if what he's trying to do is to say, therefore, he's not an MVP type player, there's a couple problems, and you outlined one of them. But let's just leave it at what he's saying, that we're going to compare what he's done to what the MVP seasons looked like. The first thing is you can't do totals, because the only way totals work is if you assume that Jordan Love can't be healthy for a full season. And what I would argue is that Jordan Love would only win MVP if he was healthy for a full season. So we would need to look at his per game stats, or at least extrapolate out what his per game stats would be out to 17 games or whatever. We would have to do that. Otherwise, we're being completely disingenuous and dishonest. But you also bring up another fantastic point with what you're doing, which is to say that MVP seasons are not what these quarterbacks do every single year. So to say that he can't be an MVP quarterback is silly, because even MVP quarterbacks don't have those seasons every year. So you're right. If you just go back the previous year, you can kind of get some kind of a picture of what not just MVP players did in MVP seasons, but what do MVP players do in non-MVP seasons. And then you compare, like you said, the non-MVP seasons of guys like Stafford, etc., to the non-MVP seasons of Jordan Love to see, can you make the case, which either way, it doesn't make any damn sense, because, again, it depends what he's trying to prove here. If you're trying to prove that Jordan can't win an MVP, do you understand all I would have to do to essentially disprove that is find any MVP winner that had, a 3-year stretch with lower stats than Jordan Love to disprove this? do you know how easy, I mean, do you know how bad Lamar has been in certain stretches? I mean, he went from like garbage quarterback to MVP quarterback to, not very good to trash to MVP. Like I'm mixing up the order, but it's like he is very volatile. So the idea that, if you're down here, that means you can't be up here. Where are you getting that from? That's the part that you have to prove. So you've pulled up a stat. The problem is the disconnect between the stat and the thing you're claiming. And your job now is to try to connect those two. I need you to connect with me the fact that this stat means this. And if it does, that means I can apply it backwards to other MVP quarterbacks. And none of them will fail that test. Right? And of course they will. That's why, again, people get upset with stats because of people like that. You know what I mean? But again, like I've said, the stats don't lie. People lie. The stat that he put out is 100% correct. It's the conclusion that he's drawing from the stat. And I think if people got a little bit better, and I'm certainly not perfect at this, it's a very difficult thing to fully get perfect. But if people had a better ability to discern what they're actually looking at and stop just assuming that, for example, I'm sure I've fallen prey to this as well, but things like, well, here's the EPA per play, therefore he's the number one quarterback because EPA per play says so. That's not correct. It's a hell of a strong argument in favor of that quarterback, but EPA is not a stat that directly sets out to say this is the most valuable quarterback. It provides a sort of value in a very particular way. So in a very specific sense, it's saying, and I forget the verbiage, but you can go read it. And it's if you read the definition of EPA, it's saying exactly that and nothing beyond that. Now, that in and of itself, again, is extremely strong. But don't fall for the trick of assuming that it's equivalent to, like, the ultimate standard of who the best quarterback is. It's a great standard. It's a great metric. But you got to remember, a lot of times we talk about things in different terms. There's a difference between being, all-encompassing or perfect or complete and being the best. We just had the primaries, and this obviously didn't happen in the primaries, but let's say we had like 50 candidates, and they're all running for office. There's two different scenarios. One of the candidates gets 100%. That would be sort of the completionist argument. That would be like EPA tells me 100% of the picture. It's a perfect metric. That's not what's being said. The other is that you have 50 different people. It's pretty evenly distributed, but the guy with the highest had 11%. That would be the best metric, but it's still a massive gap away. And I think EPA is much closer to 100%. I'm just providing that picture. When we say things like the best can still be unbelievably far from that complete picture. Right? It's like the team with the best odds to win the Super Bowl. Well, they definitely, and they can have by far the best odds to win the Super Bowl. It might be, 34% odds compared to the next highest, which is like 21%. That's a massive gap. But there's still a, 65, 66% chance they're not going to win the Super Bowl. So, again, when you see nonsense like this, the automatic assumption and the problem that people, and this is where Bears fans get all pissy about stuff when it comes to stats, you don't just look at it and say, well, I know that that's not true, even though I can't necessarily prove it, and so I'm just going to say stats are stupid. No. Somebody is manipulating stats. Don't abandon them. Don't pretend that they're bad. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to believe somebody because of the stats. Just break it down very simply. What is it specifically that they're presenting? And then what is it specifically that they're claiming this is telling you? It's that gap in between that you can attack. They have to make the case that A connects to B, and they're not going to be able to do it. First of all, because anytime you do this, it doesn't connect perfectly. Even in the case of like EPA per play, here's the top quarterback. You're implying that means he's the best quarterback. The gap is EPA per play and the claim that this is the best quarterback. The gap there is the problem. And you could very easily say, does EPA per play automatically make you the best quarterback in football? The answer is no. Now, it might be our best metric, and it might be fair to say that it provides the best clarity that we have. Therefore, it's how could you say it? It's not 100%, but it's kind of like how I look at PFF. I know PFF is flawed, but it is so significantly better than anything else in terms of providing grades through film, right? This is the whole eye test thing, which by my standards still makes it a stat, but we can leave that alone if we continue to pretend that they're separate things. It doesn't matter. You say, well, the teams have, they've all said it's bad. Fine. The teams have their own metrics, and their metrics are going to be better. But what we have from PFF is so astronomically better than anything else that we have available to us that I'm going to use it. It provides an insane amount of clarity, and I will grant that there is some wiggle room here. But the idea that a guy with like an 85 PFF grade might be actually bad because it's not arbitrary. It's going to largely point you in the correct direction with some plus or minus errors in there. Fine. So that would be and listen, AI can help a lot with this. This is why we don't need to just abandon things. If AI can help us kind of think through these things a lot of times. And I think one of the best things that you could do is anytime you see something like that, say, here's what somebody said. Here's their argument. Here is what they're implying. Does A equal B? Is this a good argument? And AI will automatically say, no, this is not a good argument. Or maybe it's 50-50, they'll be polite about it and be like, it's not they'll think it's you, so they'll be like, it's a good argument, but here's a couple things you need to think about. They will tell you the flaws in it. And the fun thing for me is very similar to Andy, is not just that, hey, you did this and you're wrong and therefore you're stupid. He very easily could have just went to that person and said, here's the flaw in your methodology, idiot, and just left it at that. But the fun thing is he's like, you know what's interesting? I wonder if I went back and I did this. And that's what I've been talking about before, where it's like, think through what are the right questions, because that's ultimately what we're talking about. The person had a question. Is Jordan Love an MVP quarterback? But he went about answering that question the wrong way. So Andy said, okay, I got the question. Here's how I would answer that question. And then here's how I would find the information and the stats to provide me the answer to that. And I probably would have done it slightly different than Andy. And again, you can do different things. I could take the average. I could also take the minimum. And I think, especially with arguing with this guy, I just take the bare minimum. And if Jordan Love, over a 17-game season, has ever crossed that minimum, all you have to do is say, here's the lowest that an MVP has had. Here's the best season Jordan's had. It's clearly above that. So what are you talking about? And again, to Andy's point, like that's just, there's still a whole problem of you're comparing MVP seasons to non-MVP seasons. But even just that one thing, done. It's over. They have nothing left to say. It's the problem with bad methodology. You can get a hit 1,000 different ways, but he just thinks he's a freaking genius. And I give him credit for trying. He actually went out and found the data. He's doing 10 times more work than anybody else. But in his attempt to discredit Jordan Love in the most absurd kind of a way, which, of course, this is how negative fans think. Everything is about Super Bowls and MVP. Everything is the top. Notice how I've never said anything about, like, Super Bowls or MVPs or any of that. I mean, very rarely, because it's not... I think... And I hate to put it this way, but I tend to think that when you get into like the data stuff enough, you realize that actually winning and all that largely comes down to luck. All you can do is have really good pieces, hope through luck that those pieces stay healthy, and then hope through luck that the talent you have will end up causing you to win. But ultimately, this is just rolling the dice, man. And more talent just means better odds, right? So it's like if you were to, you can have and I could create something like this if you wanted to play with it, but it would be like if you had a random simulator and in a game you have a certain percentage chance of winning, right? And so let's say you're the best team in football. I could give you 70% odds over every single team, including through the playoffs. In fact, let me just do that real quick. I'm just curious, and nobody has this good of odds, but let me just try something here. All right, I'm just gonna have AI code this for me real quick, and I'm just gonna do this simulation because ultimately this is what it comes down to, and this is what the negative fans don't ever want to acknowledge. It can't be luck. There always has to be if there's a problem, it's you. You're the problem. And that's true on a micro level, right? If you suck, that's a you problem. That's correct. But the argument for me, or the question for me, isn't how many Super Bowls has Jordan Love won? How many games has Jordan Love won? How many MVPs has Jordan Love won? I mean, MVP is maybe a little bit, but it's kind of irrelevant. What matters to me for every player is how good are you? For the coach, it's how good are you? And you don't reverse engineer that from the end result. All right, here we go. Win percentage chance per game. So it just set it to 55. Let's do that. Well, you know what? No, I said 70. We'll bump it up to 70. All right. So it pulled up some BS fake games here. So we're going to sim the Detroit Lions. Win. Lost to the Dallas Cowboys. Win. So keep in mind, because again, this is the way, think about this through the eyes of a negative fan. We win 3 games. We have 70% odds is insane. It's not like impossible. It's not like 14-point spread or whatever, but it's like a 7-point spread. In fact, I should bump it up to 72% because that is a 7-point spread. The Packers will have a handful of these per year, but I'm talking every single game, every single week, and we still lose to Dallas. Do you know how angry people are going to be? I mean, 4-1's a good record, but, that Dallas game left a bad feeling in my mouth. Then we come out of the bye week, we lose to Arizona. Unacceptable. Freaking unacceptable. 7-point spread. We can't beat these teams. That was a team we shouldn't have lost to. Blah, 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 blah. Win. Lost to the Giants. Win. Lost to the Bears. Win. All right. Now, let me ask you something. We are 13-4. By all accounts, this team should win. I'm telling you that they're going to be 7-point favorites, or 6.5, I guess, point favorites every single week through the postseason. They are the best team, 13-4. Can you guarantee me they win here? They can win. They should win because they're the best team. But I think all of us sitting here know that's not really the point. We need to go 4 in a row, and we've gone 4 in a row. We didn't do it at first because we lost number 4, but one time this year, weeks 12, 13, 14, and 15, we did win. And we have to do that again. But every other time we were not able to do that. We had 3 in a row, then 1 in a row, then 3 in a row, and now we're actually on a 2-game win streak, so technically we need to go 6 in a row. Do you think we're going to do that? Can you promise me we're going to do it? You can't. And I know you don't want this to be the reality. It's not luck. It's about talent. Yeah, it's about talent, and it's about talent on the other side too. So both teams are talented. Both teams have the ability to win. And as I've said before, another way to think of this, if we run this 100 times, how many times do the Packers win? Is it 100? How many times would you expect them to win? 100? 70? 60? 50? I mean, according to the 70% odds, they should win 7 out of 10. Okay, fine. So if they win 70 times out of 100, that means out of 100 times that they would win 30 times. Can you promise me this game right here isn't one of those 30 times? Of course you can't. And so, I mean, that is definitive proof that this does come down to statistical chance. So, and again, negative fans will never, ever, ever acknowledge this. If you don't win the Super Bowl, you have failed. It is a flaw somewhere. It doesn't, and what I'm demonstrating is that it doesn't have to be a flaw. All right, well, let's sim it, okay? Wild card opponent, we win. There we go. Out of the wild card, we wouldn't have been a wild card team probably, but whatever. NFC divisional opponent. Ready? And we lost. We're out. Why? Who failed? Nobody. This is just what happens. All right? This is just what happens. Even teams that have won insane amounts of Super Bowls, you could absolutely argue that they have upped their odds significantly somehow. But even still, we're absolutely on some level talking about luck. And you could look at so many of those Chiefs comebacks. Is there talent? Is there grit? Is there determination? Yes, there's all those things. And I think Mahomes and Brady kind of have that in common, which helped to drive that, along with good coaching. Fine. But you're always talking about luck on some level. If a ball gets tipped the wrong way, look at all the dropped interceptions Mahomes has had in his career. all the little tiny things have to go exactly a certain way in order for you to win or lose a game. That's just a freaking reality. Which is why I always start from the bottom up and the negative fans start from the top down. They're doing it wrong. As I've said consistently since day one, the only thing you can do is build the best possible team to give you the best possible odds, and then you're just rolling the freaking dice. That's it. All you're doing is rolling the dice. Now, there is a number. I don't know what that number is, but there is a number that would give you incredible odds of winning a Super Bowl. I'm kind of just playing with it now. I won the Super Bowl at 90% odds. I won it at 80% odds. So we're probably getting close. But again, what is the the argument is always, well, the Packers can't get it done in the postseason. Well, let's think about this for a second. The Packers probably are pretty close to 70% chance winners throughout the regular season. Again, it's about 6.5 point favorites. Depending on the opponent, that's roughly what they are for most just kind of teams, right? Or 3 point. I shouldn't say that. It's probably 3 to 4 point favorites. In fact, let me look at what that is. So it would be about 60. Let's call it 62%. 62% generally will sim the remaining. So that's an 11-6 record. That's about right. So if you are about a 3.5 point favorite, generally speaking, meaning sometimes you're a dog, sometimes you're this, sometimes you're 7, you end up with about an 11-6 record. But whether you win the Super Bowl becomes much more complicated because now your odds drop. You're probably not going to go through as big a favorites. You might be a 1 point or a 2.5 point favorite. So the complication becomes your odds get worse in the postseason. So yes, when you roll the dice in the postseason, you're more likely to lose than you were throughout the regular season, which is why the Packers are not unique. There are other teams that are regularly successful that just don't have the Super Bowls to back it up. In fact, pretty much everybody's record is better in the regular season than the postseason, aside from, I'm sure, a few anomalies. Patriots or something stupid through a certain stretch, because obviously you have to be perfect to win a Super Bowl, but most times you don't win a Super Bowl. But if you win the Super Bowl almost every time you go to the playoffs, then maybe. You get what I'm saying, right? So don't start from the end point and work backwards. Don't say how many wins. Don't say how many Super Bowls. Don't start at MVP for crying out loud. It's not where you start. The only question is he a good quarterback? Let the rest work itself out. Because if he's a good quarterback, if he is what we all say he is on an efficiency level, then it really just comes down to the amount of opportunities, which comes down largely, number one, to health, and then number two, the pace of play that's been a big topic of discussion of late. And whether you want to blame Matt LaFleur or a slow grinding defense or whatever the cause of that may be, that's really all that matters. But even that is stupid, because now we're talking about counting stats. So you have like the greatest quarterback in football that is efficient on a down-to-down, play-to-play basis, which causes you to win games because he's more efficient than the opposite offense and quarterback or whatever. But because his counting stats aren't as high, we don't give him the same accolades. And again, I shouldn't go down this path, but believe me when I tell you, it really doesn't matter the pace of play. I know we all want him to have, 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, but the pace of play doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is points per drive. Not how many drives, it's points per drive. Now, if you can steal a drive through turnovers, you always want to win the turnover battle, but that's why. Because now you can actually lose the points per drive, technically, and still win the game because you've had extra drives. That's why interceptions are so shockingly valuable. Because you've done a double switch where they lose a possession and you gain a possession. Now you multiply out the points per drive. Good luck winning. Now think about how many points per drive you have to get to overcome that. So winning the turnover battle is critical, and then win the points per drive battle. How many drives is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if it's one drive. The only thing that matters is that you're efficient on those drives and that you win the game. And I think that's what Matt LaFleur understands. Hopefully Jordan Love understands. The fans don't understand. They want shootouts and they want high stat numbers. But it is irrelevant. All right. I'm going to leave it at that. That was more of a Packernet thing than a Packernet After Dark, but Andy got me going. So We do have just 4 calls. Now, we have a preseason game coming up, so I'm hoping to get your guys' input prior and after. But I won't skip calls, all right? We'll just go through all of it because I want to encourage the callers to call in. If we had tons and tons of calls, we might do that, but it's a little more slow going. So get your calls in. I will skip none of them, and we'll go ahead and get this going again tomorrow. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.